So your corporate background is as a C-suite marketing and advertising executive, and yet you wrote a book on mergers and acquisitions, and people might not think those two align. So tell me, how did that happen?
I often wonder that myself. How did this happen? And Sue, I think it's why we fangirled each other when we first chatted because marketing and branding is such a part of my DNA. You spend 25 years in marketing and advertising, and I don't want to say you drink the Kool-Aid, but you absolutely believe marketing is the most important and essential thing that there is.
Right.
And as a result of that, and you touched on it in the opening, brand identity becomes so important to you, right?
Yep.
Developing that brand identity. And I went through three separate multi-billion dollar M&A deals as a marketing executive. In those three times, I was on all sides. I've been acquired. I was part of an acquiring company.
Okay.
I've been acquired by private equity. And I kept seeing consistently the same things happening as it related to identity.
Welcome to the Turbo Branding Show, where we help you ignite your growth by leveraging your brand to grow faster, easier, and more successfully. You'll discover insightful conversations from our powerful guests, founders, CEOs, and advisors for thriving businesses who are sharing how they have successfully built strong brands to help you expand and grow. I'm your host, Sue Kirchner, and today we are welcoming Jennifer Fondrevay to the show. So let's delve into today's episode and turbocharge your brand. First, thank you so much for being here today, Jennifer. I appreciate it.
And listen, with that kind of an intro, knowing I'm a powerful guest, I got I gotta deliver something.
That's right. That's right. I think you're a powerful guest, and I'm excited to hear that delivery. But yeah, I'm really excited to hear about the essential role the brand plays in an M&A growth strategy, because that's something that I have definitely believed and worked with some of my clients on, and I absolutely want to hear your take on it. But first, let me start by introducing Jennifer to everyone. So Jennifer Fondrevay is the founder and chief humanity officer of Day One Ready, which is an international consultancy that advises and guides CEOs, business owners, entrepreneurs, and their executives through the to be expected people challenges of growth strategy pursuits, whether that's business transformation, merger, or acquisition. And as a C-suite executive, Jennifer led teams through three separate multi-billion dollar acquisitions, turning her experience into a best-selling satirical business book, Now What? A Survivor's Guide for Thriving Through Mergers and Acquisitions. And in the book, it draws on nearly 3 years of research and 60 plus executive interviews. And it now serves as an M&A playbook for executives and a handbook for frontline leaders. Jennifer was awarded the 2019 Entrepreneur of the Year Award by North Shore Women in Business, and she is routinely tapped by CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox News for her perspective on change leadership. She's the author of a business column with Forbes, and she's published in the Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Inc. magazine. Her TED Talk, Embrace Uncertainty to Create Opportunity, has been one of TEDx Wilmette's most popular talks. Woo! You are a powerful
Wow.
guest.
I gotta say, I need to have you read that at all places I go.
That's
Most
ready.
more
That's
than
right.
not, I'm like, I need to put that down to like two sentences.
Yeah. I loved it. I'm impressed. So welcome. And yeah, let's dig in and talk about the role of the brand in an M&A transaction. So the first question I have for you is, so your corporate background is as a C-suite marketing and advertising executive, and yet you wrote a book on mergers and acquisitions, and people might not think those two align. So tell me, how did that happen?
I often wonder that myself. How did this happen? And Sue, I think it's why we fangirled each other when we first chatted because marketing and branding is such a part of my DNA. You spend 25 years in marketing and advertising, and I don't want to say you drink the Kool-Aid, but you absolutely believe marketing is the most important and essential thing that there is.
Right.
And as a result of that, and you touched on it in the opening, brand identity becomes so important to you, right?
Yep.
Developing that brand identity. And I went through three separate multi-billion dollar M&A deals as a marketing executive. In those three times, I was on all sides. I've been acquired. I was part of an acquiring company.
Okay.
I've been acquired by private equity. And I kept seeing consistently the same things happening as it related to identity.
Hmm.
And I will absolutely confess, I probably have a greater sensitivity to identity than most because of the marketing piece of it. And I just was constantly feeling through those different merger and acquisition experiences
Mhm.
that those who were doing the transaction didn't realize the influence of identity on the people in the organization. That
Right.
when you identify with a company, it can be very hard to navigate what the new company is,
Right.
right? It's hard to let go of that old identity. You're, as William Bridges, who famously wrote Managing Transitions, he writes about the neutral zone, right? When you're trying to let go of the old, you haven't yet embraced the new, and you're stuck in what he calls the neutral
Neutral
zone.
zone. Okay.
And so, as part of my marketing experience, as an executive leading marketing and being sensitive to identity, by the third M&A deal, I thought there has got to be a better way of doing M&A where the
Hmm.
identity piece is central to the discussion and the people piece.
Yeah.
Uh, I call them to be expected people challenges because when I was interviewing CEOs for my book, they consistently kept saying, you know, we had when I asked them what's the thing that surprised you the most, it was just all the people challenges. It was the emotions. They weren't prepared for that.
Yeah.
And so I call them the expected people challenges because they can be expected.
Right.
So I think it's my marketing background that led me to write the book and become a consultant on it because of that sensitivity to culture, identity, and branding overall.
Yeah. No, I love that because, as you're saying, a merger and acquisition, it's change. Take everything else out of the equation and it's change. And what is the number one thing that you need to do when you're trying to sell change to someone is you need to talk about, well, what are the benefits and how is it going to work and what is your place in the change and things like that. And I think a lot of companies, they forget to do that. They forget to communicate. They're so wrapped up in the operational side of it, or, we're auditing the financials, we're auditing the IT part of it, we're auditing operations, and no one stops to say, but why have we not talked to the people who are going to be impacted by this? And it's not just employees, it's also customers who get impacted
Absolutely.
with that. So,
And you mentioned up front in my bio that I write for Harvard Business Review. And
mhm.
this year, I had an article come out that M&A should be transformational, not transactional.
Ooh,
Because everything you just listed tends to be the focus, right? It's the transactional aspect of the deal.
right.
Transformational piece of it, right? Communicating a vision for where you're going, what this new company is going to be as you
Hmm.
come together. More often than not, when I'm advising CEOs and business owners, I am talking to them about painting that vision of what the two companies together, what each brings, the value that both bring together in that partnership
Yep.
so that people can understand not only where they're going, but the role that they can play. And exactly as you said, if you haven't communicated that vision, if you just say, hey, we're coming together, market opportunity was there, but what's the vision? Why are you coming together? Because people want to be part of something bigger.
Right.
And that, exactly as you said, tends to be a missed opportunity when people don't paint that vision for why the companies are coming together and what the opportunity is moving forward.
Right. And you're right, absolutely. To build off of that too. I mean, I've worked with some clients going through mergers and acquisitions from small, this was my grandfather's business who built it for me, and I feel such, guilt and responsibility to keep the brand going, but I know the brand name is not right. We've had emotional discussions about that, all the way up to large companies where we're not allowed to talk about anything during that merger and acquisition kind of preparation part
Right.
because
The
the
due
FEC,
diligence.
due
Yeah.
diligence, FEC or FCC gets involved, and SEC, nobody wants to talk about what's going on, but you can always talk about the vision and the brand and what the transaction is going to mean on the back end. And it's a huge opportunity for people to be using that due diligence time to plant the seeds of why this is going to be such a great thing and how it's going to transform the company employment opportunities and even growth for customers and things like that. So,
Yeah,
um,
and part of the my rule of thumb is as soon as you can involve your middle managers, your frontline leaders, to your point, right? During due diligence, there are a lot of compliance, legal issues, and hurdles, milestones you have to hit.
right.
But there is an opportunity where you can bring in those middle managers, and there's ways to do it, whether it's a clean room, I don't want to bore the discussion with that, but the bigger point being, because to your point, when you involve middle managers and they feel part of the journey and understanding the vision, they are the translators for that vision to
Right.
your teams. And that's a critically important step that, again, is often missed.
Yeah. No, absolutely agree with that. So now there was a statistic, I've read it in the past and I was hoping it had changed, but no, you reminded me that it's stunning that 70 to 90% of mergers and acquisitions fail. So the first question I have for you is why? And does the brand play a role in that? And then second, why do companies still keep using this growth strategy if the ROI is not there?
Well, and even though it is a statistic that has endured, when I've done research, that statistic dates back to a study from 2011.
Okay.
So, what I would say, because frankly, I've looked for companies who have done more recent analysis of M&A success or failure, but it's a statistic that everyone quotes and has been around for a while. Clayton Christensen wrote about it in a Harvard Business Review article.
Yeah.
That said, there are M&A deals. Well, actually, let me back up first. I
Okay.
absolutely wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't think a merger and acquisition is a smart growth strategy play.
Okay.
What I'm focused on is helping CEOs, business owners, entrepreneurs, private equity be smarter about the people component of it. And the
Mhm.
people component, to your point, includes the branding aspect, the identity for the company, because
Right.
that's what too often, it's not that it's not thought about, it's just considered secondary. It's not the
Right.
focus of getting the deal done. And
Right.
so while I do think that companies have gotten smarter about executing on the deal, the
Hmm.
part that still has room for improvement is the people component. And I get it, right? Now that I've been through three separate multi-billion dollar deals, but now as a consultant, I see why it happens, right? There's so much energy put into making the numbers right and
Right.
forecasting that there's this assumption that, well, we'll deal with the people stuff later, right? We've got smart people, they'll figure this out. And what I consistently say to CEOs is this is not about smart people because these are emotions that people are not used to having in business, right? You go through a grieving stage. You're
Yeah.
grieving the loss of your old identity and you aren't sure what the new identity is. And so to me, a big part of the work that I do is just more often than not, it's a revelation for CEOs.
Hmm.
They'll say, even in the interviews that I did, I had no idea how emotional that this experience, this journey can be. And
Right.
so I do think that the success percentage is improving, but where I'm focused on is the people part. And we have a long way to go. People give lip service to it, but it's still a nice to have, not a need to have as it
Right.
relates to what are the things we absolutely need to check off as we prepare for this deal?
Right. 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 Well, let me ask you, let's build more about what you call in the book these unanticipated people problems and how they can undermine the success of a merger and acquisition. But can you talk about other than, like you said, that identity, feeling like you belong to this company and now you don't know, how to fit in or belong to the new company. But can maybe you elaborate on that a little bit, other people problems, and then you were telling me before we, had this interview set up about the story of the Nokia and Navtech merger. And I'd love to hear some of your takeaways on that about what went right, what went wrong with that.
Well, it's my origin story. That was the first acquisition I'd been through, and I absolutely identified with Navtech. I had
Mhm.
moved to Europe with my husband and two little kids. They were 1 and 3. We lived in Paris, France. I'm half French, speak French. It was my dream job. And I was opening new markets as well as helping establish Navtech, which was a digital map maker.
Mm,
Maps are ubiquitous now. But
right.
back in the late 90s and early 2000s, right, it was a Garmin device on the bottom shelf at a Radio Shack that you could buy for $800, or it was a $2,000 line item in your car.
Hmm.
Right now, you can't imagine going anywhere without plugging a location in your phone or in your car. But back then, it was still evolving and it was
Yeah.
exciting. Nokia recognized the power of location-based solutions and acquired Navtech in 2008. And I would say, listen, there were a lot of variables that led
Hmm.
to that acquisition not being as successful as it could have been. So hindsight is always 2020.
Always.
But some of the things that I observed in that Nokia was B2B, excuse me, B2C, and we were B2B,
Hmm.
business to business.
Right.
So we were about helping the automotive companies, the telecommunications and enterprise, right? We
Yep.
had business to business as our operating model, whereas Nokia was B2C, directly to consumer. And so there was a lot of education that needed to
Mm.
be done in terms of how B2B works. Probably spent at least, the first year doing presentations to show why we would bend over backwards, right? To help our automotive partners, do research and demonstrate how a navigation system could positively influence the driver of a car,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
How a bad navigation experience in my BMW might make me hate BMW,
Right. Right.
right? So there was just a lot of education around that. And for me, really, the reason why that was my origin story is I went through absolutely the stages of grief.
Mm.
I was so excited initially when the deal was announced because I realized my belief was, Nokia was acquiring us because they recognized to connect people in the future, it would be through maps, not just through the phone.
Okay.
And now, like, people are astonished if they get a phone call. It's more text and
It's like,
email,
why are you calling me? Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so I thought, wow, Nokia's brilliant. They're acquiring us because they recognize maps will be important in the future. And so as I saw that that wasn't necessarily their focus, right? They had a lot that they were dealing with on the handset side of the business. It opened my eyes. And, I will say I went through the stages of grief. I had a hard time getting to acceptance. I was not, I will say I went through all the stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I write
Mhm.
about that in my book because I experienced it firsthand. Here was my
Yeah.
dream job that I just saw kind of dissolving over
Right.
time. And I felt like the people who I was working with had no concept of the job that I did, the value that it had to the company, the value that my team brought to the company, how our relationship with sales helped us to drive sales. I felt that I wasn't doing marketing anymore. I was just explaining over and over again the role that we played.
Right.
And there were a lot of lessons learned, which is frankly that origin story was the first spark for, man, I should write this down, right? What
Okay.
that looks like and why. And then by my third M&A deal, and frankly, it was while I was interviewing CEOs for the book. I wanted to make sure this wasn't just my observation. So interviewing CEOs and CFOs and CHROs, private equity and whatnot for the book just reinforced what I experienced was common. There were
Okay.
patterns to how M&A were executed. And it was in those interviews where CEOs just repeatedly said, these are the people challenges that we repeatedly experience. You need to do more than just write a book, right? The book will only go so far. And frankly, it was those conversations that compelled me to pursue my consultancy and the work that I do now. Because they all acknowledged
Right.
the identity piece, but they didn't appreciate the power of identity until they saw how emotional people got during the deal.
Right. Now, have you found, because one thing I found when I was doing some merger and acquisition work around the brand and things like that is I'd be out, networking and people ask, oh, do you want introductions and all that? And I'd be like, yeah, I'd love to hear If someone is in the very beginning stages of a merger and acquisition, transaction, I'd love to get in and talk to the CEO, the founder, and talk about the importance of the brand kind of a thing. But what I found was interesting was as I got into networking and was introduced to people and things like that, I changed my pitch a little bit to say, hey, I am looking to help companies going through merger and acquisition, but I want to talk to people who are on their second
Yes.
merger and acquisition. Have you, because they messed it up the first time and they
Yes.
recognize they need help. Do you find that as well when you go out and talk to potential companies? Do you have a
Absolutely.
hard time? Yeah.
Yeah. Sue, you are not alone in that.
Yay. It's not just me doing a
In
bad
fact,
job of pitching it to
people used
people.
to ask
Right.
me, like, what's the best time to bring you in?
Yeah.
Right. And I would say, my ideal time frame is as early as possible, right? Even
Right.
during that due diligence, the LOI, letter of intent has been signed, right? We're walking down the aisle. That's the ideal time.
Yeah.
But I have absolutely qualified that because more often than not, particularly if it's their first, they'll think, oh, Jennifer, what you say is so smart. But you know what? We'll be fine.
Yeah.
We'll be fine. And then I give them my card. And then months later, I get a desperate call. Hey, can
Mm-hmm.
you help us still?
Right.
Because, again, I don't think it's hubris. I think it's purely just lack of understanding human nature.
Right.
And what's fascinating to me is the same employees who would bleed your company colors, right? Those are the employees who can frustrate you because
Yeah.
they're having a hard time accepting that the company is changing.
Right.
And I said, think about that. These were your powerful employees who would bleed your company colors for you, and now you're frustrated by them.
Right.
Think about that. Why is that? Right? It's because you've got to do your part to help them understand what was the genesis for this? Why did this deal occur? What's the vision for where you're going?
Right.
And helping them to understand the role that they can play. And that's why I say middle managers are critically important because the middle managers are the ones who help translate vision to here's what this means for us.
For us.
You're
Right.
absolutely right, Sue. I've had that. In fact, I've had painful experiences where I've been brought in early. It was a first acquisition, or no, it was a second acquisition. The first one was a very small one, and
Okay.
they assumed in the second one, which was going to be a much larger one, we already know this. We know how to do this. And so, they were thinking, we're good, we're fine. And sure enough, they faced many challenges because they went in with a bit of arrogance
Mm-hmm.
about it and had a tough time. Talent
But,
left, and
mhm.
they were not able to course correct as quickly as they thought they could.
Right. Because I think that's what we need to spell out for people who haven't gone through this before. It's like you could say, oh, well, don't forget the people and you need to, help them. But, what are the backlashes or what are the negative effects if you don't handle this right? Can paint a
Well, yeah,
picture.
I'd say you and I probably have a list, right? So
Yeah.
the most immediate ones, the ones that will impact your revenue, is loss of talent. People
Yep.
leave.
Yep.
Uh, I will say to CEOs, listen, once a deal is announced, it's like chum for recruiters. Like
Mhm.
it's just, oh, so they'll start calling your people
Yeah.
who maybe they weren't able to even get a call with before because they loved the company. And now
Right.
they'll say, oh, I hear news on the street is you're going through an acquisition. And M&A, whether we like it or not, just has a lot of negative baggage attached to it.
Yeah.
And so I'll say to business owners, CEOs, you've got to be smart and you need to have a plan. And by the way, absolutely, right?
Mhm.
Compensation packages, bonuses, all of that can play a part. But your employees, the reason why they stay and wouldn't take those calls before is because they felt valued.
Right.
They felt like they were contributing. And
Right.
the longer it takes for them to understand their value in this new world and how they can contribute, the greater potential it is to lose them. And the other thing that I always highlight is so, there's always rock stars in companies. Everyone knows the rock star. that rock star in my book can become a former rock star. When the
Mm,
metrics of success change, the thing that got them there will not always be the same thing that can help them pivot, right? They have a
right.
very hard time pivoting to accept the new metrics because they became successful on the old set of metrics. And so I'll say to leadership, you need to be prepared that you have people who were rock stars who are going to take some time to pivot. But
Yeah.
the good news is you'll have people in your company who will now become new rock stars, people who you may not have even appreciated before, but with these new metrics can have an opportunity to shine. And
Right.
so there's the good and the bad of it, but I will say first and foremost, loss of talent is a
Hmm.
huge one.
Yeah.
The inevitable, and I'm sure, Sue, you've seen this as well, there's a drop in productivity as
Yeah.
people are trying to figure out, who's on first, who's in charge, who do I listen to, how are decisions made? There's the cog gets slowed down, the wheel
Mm,
doesn't move.
right.
And so it's those two things combined that the more you focus on the people piece sooner,
Hmm.
you mitigate that. I don't
Right.
think you can ever completely remove it, but you certainly can mitigate it. And again, your middle managers play a part in that.
Yeah, that's excellent. And yeah, I would say in my experience too, I'm going to expand the people definition to be your customers, right? Because that's something
Absolutely.
people don't think about either. You sit there and you say, oh, well, we're acquiring this firm because we want their customers. We want access to their customers. But brand building is all about building a relationship. That's your whole goal in life is to build a relationship so that people, like you said, bleed your
Yes.
colors, love your firm. You can make a mistake and they will stick with you and things like that. But then when these mergers and acquisitions come around, I've seen customers, they send one letter out to a customer that just says, everything's going to be fine. We're going through this merger and acquisition, but nothing will change. Everything will be fine. And customers they know not everything is going to be the same. They absolutely know that. And what you've done is you've broken the relationship and now you need to rebuild it with your customers. And a lot of times I've seen some of my clients, they never thought of that. They never thought that there would be emotional connection from the customer side, that they would then view it as, oh, merger and acquisition, things are different. I'm sure the salesperson who I love is not going to be there for very long. So now this is a great opportunity for me to start shopping around and look for other alternative,
Mhm.
people to work with, and they forget about that. So don't forget, obviously the people is absolutely essential to delivering the products and the service and the productivity and things like that. But don't think the customer is just sitting there saying, oh, they said everything was going to be fine, everything's going to be the same. And it's
Right.
not. So
Right.
you talked a little bit about this kind of archetype or different archetypes that emerge post merger and acquisition, and you named the rock star. But I thought it was interesting in your book, you have different archetypes that emerge. And could you explain a little bit more about who those are or what those are and how it affects the company or how it can improve the success of the merger and acquisition?
Yeah, they're my M&A personas. And what's been fascinating to me, so I've been invited to speak. I've done keynotes and workshops, but the one that always fascinates me, so I have been invited to speak at deal maker conferences,
Mm,
right? And I think it's because of my personas. Everyone wants to know, because they're caricatures in my book. I
sure,
have 10
sure.
caricatures, and when I speak, I've got 10 posters that are around the room. Everyone wants to know, why does she have a dominatrix in her book, right? Who's the know-it-all, the former rock star? Because they're caricatures. And I did that intentionally. I made them cartoon characters because I
Hmm.
wanted to humanize. I thought if I just write a chapter about the know-it-all, people might laugh because of the description, but to see a caricature that shows a know-it-all, I think just helps humanize and reminds people of the
Right,
people part of a merger or an acquisition. And
right.
so those 10 personas, frankly, I know all 10 of them.
Yeah.
I've dealt with all 10 of them. Frankly, I've been a couple of those personas myself through different M&A deals. And it was really to just bring to life what can happen to people through change and uncertainty.
Yeah.
Everyone deals with change and uncertainty differently.
Right.
And I use the pandemic as a reference point. I'll say, think about it. When we were going through the pandemic, the most uncertain period in all of our lives, you probably saw people act differently than you would have expected,
Mhm.
right? People who
Yeah.
maybe you thought would have no issue wearing a mask, who hated wearing masks, right? Social distancing, right? Like all of the rules, everyone reacted differently
Right.
to the situation. And I'll say, so you just have that, to me, that's a great reference point. It just means everyone reacts differently to
Right.
uncertainty. You need to be prepared for that. And the personas were the best, I guess, demonstration or bringing to life what I saw happen to people repeatedly. So I have a know-it-all and a know-nothing.
Mm.
I've got the dominatrix, right? So that person who essentially has no compassion, no empathy. It's about the objective, right? And so I'll say, particularly when I speak with boards for companies, I'll say this is a very seductive persona, right? Because they
Yeah.
get the job done. But in the process of getting the job done, they use fear as the operating model.
Mm.
Are worried and terrified to lose their job. So what can happen is you can lose great talent or people burn out. And so you have to realize that, well, the dominatrix, who's essentially the bully.
Yeah.
Uh, I had a bully character, and I had a friend of mine in DEI said, well, you really should have as many women as you do men in your
Mhm.
caricatures. And so my bully turned into a dominatrix.
Dominatrix. I love it. Yeah.
But it's again, and I'll say to CEOs, right? Incentivize people to make sure that you're being collaborative and inclusive in terms of how you move people forward, because your bully slash dominatrix can be successful in the short term,
Mm.
but can kill you in the long term because you've lost great talent or people just shut down.
Okay.
I have also other caricatures, like the specialist, right? The person who was really good at a certain type of job or had knowledge in a certain area, who can panic and wonder, is what I do going to be valued in this new company? I have the ostrich, right? Those people, and we're all typically an ostrich at one point, right? Who stick their head in the sand and just hope this is all going to go away. It's going to go
Right.
back to the way it was.
Yeah.
I have the missing in action, those people who wait on the sidelines to see how things are going to play out. Now, missing in action, a few of those, all companies have them. But when
Mhm.
you have whole departments of people who are just waiting to see, and that's why I'll say to business owners, the worst thing that you can do, one, is to say, nothing's going to change. It's going to just stay the way it was. That's not true. It's already changed. Just
Right.
this announcement alone, it's changed. But also if you say, and I think we're going to be having to, let this group go, but we'll keep you on for the next few months until we figure that out. Okay, you've essentially said to them, okay, well then don't bother working.
Right.
And
Right.
and so those become your missing in action. They're just waiting to see how things will play out.
Hmm.
So all of these personas were what I witnessed. And frankly, when I was interviewing executives for the book, they said, oh my God, I know these. Like all I had to do was show them one of my caricatures. I
Yeah.
didn't even have a name on the caricature yet,
Uh-huh.
but they would say, we had a know-it-all in our last acquisition. And he totally undermined the success in the first few months because he kept saying, well, we already did that. We already tried that,
Mm.
to the point where the company got acquired that said, well, then why'd you buy us? Right?
Yeah.
Why'd you acquire us if you
Yeah.
already know everything?
Yeah.
So those are just the high level personas. And it really, what's been fascinating to me is how people react to these personas because everyone knows one and has said, yeah, here's how they undermine the deal and here's how we dealt with them. So that's my goal with that section of my book. And when I talk about them is to say, acknowledge that this is, you may see one, if not more of these personalities, and here's how to work with them. And here's how not to become one.
Yeah. No, I like that. I really like how you branded these personas to make them easier to understand so that everybody can kind of see, it's like we're not picking on individual people, we're picking on these personas and how to identify them and look for them within the organization. So that's great. You have been so generous with your time. I have maybe two quick questions for you to kind of finish up here. But the first one is just, are there just like maybe the top three tips that no matter who you're talking to when you're consulting with them, you're like, if you do nothing else, please do these three things when you're going through a merger and acquisition to make sure that you're really taking the people component into account.
I'd say overall, it's the mindset that I impart on a CEO and his or her leadership team. And I'll say, think of this like a marriage.
Okay.
Want this to be a successful marriage. And I'll even say, okay, let's, think about the marriages that we most admire. Love is absolutely part of it. That's
Hmm.
foundational. But when you think about the marriages you most admire, respect is core to that partnership,
Right.
right? They can be very different people, but if they show and have respect for each other, that's what makes the partnership successful. So I
Mhm.
will say, first and foremost, with CEOs and their teams coming together, show respect for the other side. Recognize the value that you both bring to this partnership. Highlight that in the vision and the story that you tell. Demonstrate that not only in your words, but your actions and your deeds, because that's what trickles down. If you come into this acquisition with arrogance, you are dooming it for failure. You
Hmm.
want to demonstrate, and you know this as well as I do. Companies come together because they both needed each other.
Right.
Every acquisition I've been a part of, both parties needed the other.
Yep.
So the more that you come to that partnership with respect for the other side, and one of the consistent things that came out with CEOs when I was interviewing them for the book, they would say, I wish I'd been more humble in my first few acquisitions. I came in
Hmm.
with arrogance and we had a lot to learn. And I brought that to it's exactly why you said, I want to only work with people who this is their second acquisition or more. They've learned their lesson.
Right.
And so for me, that mindset of thinking about this like a marriage, coming to this partnership with respect for the other side and modeling that not only in how you talk, but how you behave.
Yeah.
Because as you know well, people read between the lines, they look for cues about what's really happening
Yeah.
after the deal has been announced. So I'll say to executives, you need to know people are analyzing everything.
Hmm.
Emails that you write, right? If I was used to be on the two line and now I'm on the CC line, does that mean I've gone down in responsibility? And I've had CEOs go, oh my God, I've had that happen where somebody
Yeah.
said to me, like, am I not as important anymore? And I'll
Right.
think, what are you talking about? Well, you now put me on the CC line. So I'll say, you think of it like a marriage and recognize that you need to role model the behavior you expect of others in your
Hmm.
words, your deeds, your actions across the board. And again, it's not to terrify people. It's more to just say, this is low hanging fruit. It's how you come into this partnership and then how you act, because that's what people will be looking for. So that's really my main advice.
Your
Think
main
of this
advice.
like a marriage.
I love that. Yeah, it's great. And yeah, I hope everyone's listening to that and able to focus on it. So that's great. Thank you for all of this insightful advice and illustrations and stories
Well, it,
on.
it helps that you've experienced it as well.
Well, that's true. I've been
We're
there, I've
very
seen
informed
it.
interviewers, Sue.
Yes, exactly. I'm like, no, no, we both know this happened, so let's articulate that, right? But no, thank you for all of that. But what I'd like to leave you with one last question, what I'd like to ask my guests is I am all about giving a shout out to small businesses that are just killing it with their brand. They're really focusing on it. They're doing a great job and that. So I would like to ask you, is there a small or mid-sized business that you just admire and think they do a great job with their branding?
Absolutely. In full disclosure, so it's a company called Heroic. It used to be called Heroic Public Speaking, but now it's Heroic because it's branching into more areas.
Okay.
It is a company based in Lambertville, New Jersey, and it's for speakers, growing to be speakers and authors. But what I love about this company, so it was founded by Michael Port and Amy
Hmm.
Port, who are
Okay.
former actors who now help people in their performance, right? And
Hmm.
they're getting their message out there and being speakers of credibility. And it can be speakers, keynote speakers, but it could even be just speakers who have corporate roles that they play and they want to, command the audience. But what I love about Heroic in particular is not only the branding piece of it, but the culture.
Hmm.
They are very intentional in terms of the people who they bring in,
Okay.
who, there's a vetting process. but equally the principles that they have, right? They repeat the principles for, whether you're a speaker who's just beginning, if you're a speaker who's been speaking for a while, and they're very intentional about the culture. The whole staff role models the same principles and guidance.
Mhm.
And I think the world of them, because it's not just the exterior branding, which is crisp and clean, but it's the role that culture plays and the identity, because it makes it clear, the kind of people they hire, the types of members and people who they bring in, all are of the same mindset. And I think it's one example of the power of identity that I've seen done so well.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I'm gonna go check that out because that's intriguing. So, yeah, anyone who walks the talk is doing a great job on their brand journey. So, but Jennifer, thank you so much for spending time with me today and sharing your insights on the role of branding and how that affects people during merger and acquisition. So, but if people want to talk with you about having you come out and speak or consult or even to get a copy of your book, how can they find you?
So my website, fortunately, is pretty easy, jenniferjfondrevay.com. So it's my full name.
Mhm.
I pretty much don't exist anywhere but LinkedIn. So like you won't find me hanging out on Facebook. I've tried Instagram. I can only handle one platform. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So I would say those two places. And it's Jennifer J. Fondrevay is where you can find me.
Can find you. Excellent. Good. Well, go find her, everyone. So, but thank you again for being here. It was a pleasure. And thank all of you for joining us for this episode of the Turbo Branding Show. I hope you've been inspired to ignite your growth by leveraging your brand. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could help me build the brand of the show by please sharing this episode and either liking, subscribing, or even leaving a review. And if you or someone you know would be a great guest for the show, an inspiring founder or CEO with a brand story, please let us know in the comments or connect with us via email. But thank you and stay tuned for our next episode.